This is a Derbyshire Wye. We're here by permission and the blessing of the Peacock Fly Fishing Club. This river is pretty low. We're filming this in late August and it's low, it's clear. There's a lot of fish in here, but quite a few people have been coming in the shop, which I've got the honour to run up in Bakewell. They're telling me that there's no fish in the river. There's lots of fish in the river. It's wrong to stereotype people, but if I do stereotype some people, they might be 6 foot 6 inches tall. They're busy professional people in their lives. They only get to fish once or twice a year. They've all got buggered knees through playing rugby, and they wear Panama hats and they use bare short sleeves shirts to fish in. If you wear short sleeve shirts, you're waving, if your arms are my colour and wave your arms about, it's a way of sending little warnings to the fish. So dress drab, don't wear a Panama hat, creep up on them if you can, and here's a few tips that I've found useful to trying to catch fish on a river. And the first one is, you don't actually need to cast very far. But before you can even do that, you need to get enough line out of the tip of the rod. And whatever junction of fly line and leader you've got, sometimes you'll find it snags in the top of your rod like that. Whatever you do, don't just pull it, but just give yourself a tiny bit of slack there. Turn the rod over, 8 times out of 10 it will fall out for you. If you just do a little swoosh like that, and work about a rod length of line out, with about a rod length of leader, it's quite possible to do something we referred to in a previous video. Drape it over a finger, pull, trap, come round and collect. If you make a longer pull and trap, put your fingers through that first loop and catch hold of a second loop. It looks like it's tangled, but it hasn't. And if you do this well away from the water's edge, you can then kind of creep up on them. Creep up as low and as quiet as you can. Within a rod length of it is plenty. Take notice of whatever's behind you. Derbyshire trees have got a way of growing very quickly behind you, so just watch out for them. And just get that on the swing. Let one loop go, then the other, then pop your fly out on the water. I've caught a lot of fish like that. Some of these casts I'm going to show you might look a bit fancy pants castings, but I think all the successful river anglers I know use at least a couple of these casts. They might even do it unconsciously, trying to make up a cast as you go along. I didn't make these casts up, but usually I've gleaned them from books old and new. There's a straightforward overhead cast. If I just put it a bit out further, you'll see on this slow moving bit, as soon as the fly line gets below the fly, that fly starts to skate across surface. Can you just see it starting to move across? It's creeping across, and that sort of accelerates across. It's exaggerated across a bigger, deeper, faster flowing bit of water. I'm not saying that a fly which goes across and skids round won't catch fish. Sometimes it does. There's some techniques which deliberately skid or twitch your fly, make it look a bit animated. But usually, if you're fishing certain flies on water this low, if your fly skates, you won't catch many fish. And much of river casting skills depends on casting your fly to delay that dreaded dragging effect, and if you can do it at the same time as casting in a confined space, then you're on a winner. I'll just show you a few casts. Kingfisher, see him? This is a common position. Your fly is dangling downstream of you. you want to pick it up and put it straight out. If you just start low and go straight up and straight out, there's no fuss about that. Wait till this horse goes by. If I just pick it up and go straight out, trying to make a deliberate unrolling loop so it lands gently, what I'm trying to do is delay that drag. And there's a couple of ways of doing it when you're casting across stream. One way of doing it is just to curve the rod. It's a bit quick to see that. All I'm doing is, I'll do it towards you if you like. Instead of coming straight, I'm just rotating the rod handle that way and then back again. It's a subtle sort of thing, but it works quite nicely. Just a little curve. I like it because it doesn't change the initial direction of the fly. It's good for accuracy. And you might well argue, why don't you then, in that case, just do a cast called a little reach cast? Instead of trying to be clever and turning the rod, why don't you just move the rod to one side and then back again? Well, yeah, that works just as well, possibly even better. But sometimes you haven't got the space to be moving your rod. Your line's got to be more or less vertical in the slot between two trees. So I'll do it again, just curve the rod gently. It's a nice subtle cast. I think most casting demonstrators, demonstrating on a river casting technique, they do a cast called, it's got various names, a snake cast maybe. And what they do is they move the rod from side to side like that. And with practice you can dump these zigzags of line right across the river. You can do them late, you can do them early, you can do them midstream. A good demonstrator usually puts one of their own initials out there. My middle name is Wilberforce. But if you go out and just zigzag like that, I think it's difficult to judge how much line to let out to allow for each zig and zag. I have a slightly more success recently by not bouncing the rod that way, but by bouncing it vertically. It has much the same effect. It keeps the fly going in the same direction, and you can make them bigger than that if you want, you know, and just dump a little bit of slack line out where you need it. Try not to let your fly, however drift free it may be, get very far below where your target fish is. It's possible to get enamoured. I get fascinated by watching my own fly. A couple of weeks ago I made a really good fancy pants cast. It was one of those casts. I bounced it, I let it down, I shook it, it fell out the tree, it drifted down, and I was so pleased with myself. Fish took me fly and I forgot to strike. So don't be too enamoured of it, but if you can get a 3 to 5 second drag free drift on fast water and a 7 or 8 second drift on slow water, you're not doing too badly. Bounce it, curve it, or do a little reach cast. They all have much the same effect. Easy enough it's flowing from right to left. If it's flowing from left to right, if I can just use your imagination, you need that curve to be the other way. And a way of doing it is come over your other shoulder, go right and then left and kick it round. That puts your bend the other way round. I'll do that in a bit more detail later on perhaps. There, puts your curve the other side if you imagine it's going the other way round. If we turn our attention to a fish that's maybe moving where there's a natural bit of broken water, like the top of a weir, natural or artificial, that drag problem's exaggerated. If we cast a straight line, the current grabs it and makes it move sideways. Again, most of the time a fish won't take that. We want to keep that going as straight as we can for as long as we can. And this is where that cast called a reach cast really comes into its own. End up with the rod out there and let a bit of line shoot, you can more or less trot it down straight, which is where coarse fishermen have got a big advantage. I'll do it again, reach and let a bit of line, and let it fall slack. You've more or less picked your time. You know, you can speed it up, you can make it twitch, you can alter its position in the current lane. Now it's going straighter, a coarse fisherman's got a big advantage there. It's kind of like trotting a float down to them. Very often, if you look at a river, a coarse fisherman makes a good fly angler because he knows where the stick float line is. I say he, it's mostly he's. If you turn your attention to a fish that's more or less dead downstream of you, if you've got the space, often you haven't, but you could make a cast where you go back too far, up too high, back too far, pull the rock tip out the sky and you get a nice unwinding of the line. I think it's called a puddle cast. It's a pretty good cast really, like that, and it'll run down there. One of the best anglers in Britain, he doesn't do that much. His signature cast is to get above your fish, and he just does a short stubby little cast like that, so, and lets it bounce out the sky more or less. See how the fly's more or less following those two little whatever they are drifting down, yeah? And try and match the drift of the flies which are hatching out below you. However, there's a big downside to that. It implies you've got space to do it and you can creep up on the fish without them seeing you. Quite often, and I do this fairly often, I can't get near my fish. There's a fish in fast water in one particular spot on this river where the fish are tucked right in underneath your own bank and you've got nothing but trees. You can't get on the path below them because you spook them. If you can approach them from behind, there's too many trees for you to get your fly round to them. And the way I've found is that if I can creep in and be behind a tree, can you imagine being behind a tree here? There's certainly no room to do that because you're in the branches. You have to do it sideways. And the other problem is, if you're using a pretty long leader and there's stuff behind you, that is quite a long way on a small stream. So sometimes you need to get a line out with a bit of drag-free drift down below you from round a tree. Sounds a bit complicated, that. Is that clear? And I got this from an old book actually, published in about 1931. It's not a cast you see very often. Kind of underhand it and you get a little bit of slack falling out the end, and of course doing that you can do it under your own bank. It doesn't take up nearly as much space as doing that does. Like a little underhanded cast. And they used to reckon if they use winged flies, not very fashionable nowadays, but wings are still important, it's a way of making your winged fly parachute down the right way up. I've never caught a fish on a fly that's landed the wrong way up. I'll do it again, underhanded it. And it gives you a bit of slack as well, what's not to like. But the conventional cast with respect to back cast is to use a roll cast. And a roll cast looks like this. Make a D, have an anchor point in front of you and just tap a fly out. You can get some surprising distances. I'll do that again, nice and slow. Wait till it stops and then it'll pop out. But that roll cast, it tends to go a bit higher than you think. Anybody's tried to do one usually ends up a tree if they're doing it right. It's the water's depth plus your height plus the rod length plus a loop. It goes quite high. And also there's a problem changing direction. I've got to keep that fly on the outside of that rod tip because if it's on the inside of that rot tip, it will cause a tangle. You will be in a right old mess. And if you want to change direction, say across stream, if you've got the space, you can bring it up like that and swing it round and up and out. But if you haven't got the space, sometimes a cast which breaks the rule is useful. If you're in like a tunnel of trees, you can sometimes just flip it over, let the current bring it down to you, then swing it round sideways and pop it across sideways. It kind of breaks the safety rules, that, because that fly is the top side of your rod, and if you're doing these spay casts as they're called, that is reckoned to be a cardinal sin, having the line at an angle to the rod. But doing it that way, flip, don't forget to lower the rod, you can bring it round sideways, it just gives you enough to get you up a tree. That was a good example. If you shake it, sometimes it'll drop off and a fish will take it anyway. Flip down, keep it low and sideways, and you can get it under a tree sometimes. For a little change of direction, when space is restricted, you can sometimes just bring it towards you, do a miniature version of it. But if you're casting upstream or downstream and you're in a tunnel of trees, you've still got some problems. You only need one wayward cast to get into trouble, and if you need that much line out and you haven't got that much space for either a roll cast or an overhead cast, that takes up quite a long time, long distance that, isn't it? It's deceptive. There's a way you might be able to get round it, by just smacking your hand. And if you've got enough line out, which I hadn't, bring it back and smack your hand, and you can shoot a few more yards off it. Try not to bust you. There, that got it. You're shooting a few more yards than you would otherwise. Like most roll casts, more line you've got out, the better it goes. Bang! There. Shooting a couple of yards of line that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And it gives you a tight, fast-moving loop. It's gone that far, but I've not needed that amount of space to do it in. Useful tip. So if you're turning your attention upstream, it's great to creep up behind fish. They can't normally see you coming, although you could be forgiven for thinking that to be wrong sometimes. If you make a cast upstream, it's essential to point the rot tip at the fly and gather the slack in, maybe by lifting the rod or maybe by gathering the line in as it comes towards you. Because if you just make a cast and do nothing, even on this very slow moving water here, you'll get a little puddle of line there, and that little puddle of line is enough to balk any attempt at setting the hook. If I try to strike that, I've got to go way up there before the fly even starts to move. And I miss hundreds of fish a year by intently doing that. I forget to pull my line in, I'll get slack line there. When a fish does take my fly, I don't hook him, I make a wild snatch and go, yeah, oh damn fish, I've missed another. I sometimes turn that way round like a fencer might, make a cast, and then if a fish does take the fly, I can give a quick light pull and flick the wrist, and I stand a chance of hooking the fish. I do have problems trying to hook fish. I think a lot of it is because I do so much time trying to demonstrate a textbooky cast by starting low, lifting with my whole arm and accelerating to a stop. I suspect when a fish takes the fly, I'm trying to do the same, and it leads me to missing fish. I sometimes think I do better by holding the line off and just doing a little flick of the wrist like that. That might just stand me in a bit more stead. I'm still practicing, a lot to learn yet. But casting upstream, sometimes we've got a problem where the fish, can you see just down here, right, there's a tree, there's an indentation in the bank, there's a curve, and sometimes fish will be tucked in, they'd be tucked in there. And if I put my fly straight to him, I'm across that tussock. That's no good. But you know there's a fish there, you can see rings coming out. Happens at evenings when you're feeding on spinners. By casting sideways and slightly overpowering your cast, you can get it to cut round the corner, like that. Again, if a fish does take it, try and hit him that way. Sometimes it works. I'll just round off a little bit by sometimes saying, sometimes we need to cast with, there's restricted space behind you, like a flat gap underneath a tree or a bridge. Is that a little fish rising there? And you can absolutely guarantee, if you look at the two vertical branches on something and you think, I don't want to hit those branches, that's exactly the branch that you hit. I'll just practice on those two stones down there. Because if you come sideways, you're kind of throwing a wide unwinding loop, and that unwinding loop is the one that gets stuck round your trees. That didn't, would you believe? Yeah? It just kind of hits that obstacle you're trying to avoid. It goes wide. But if you just cast sideways with a tight flat loop, you can sometimes just simply by turning your wrist over, turn a flat loop into a vertical loop. And that goes through easier. Vertical loop. And it helps with a bit of accuracy too. And if you really want to show off, you can shoot a bit of slack as well. That's about me done, I think. Oh, just two quick things. Back to where we started, no space at all. I've occasionally forced my way through a big pile of nettles and reeds. And last autumn, I was surrounded by dead reeds and I was using a light yellow fly line, like a straw coloured fly line. And I got really fed up with getting tangled up. So I got my scissors out and started snipping. I cut my blasted fly line in half, didn't I, in my eagerness. But what I could have done to change my fly, I could have done a couple of these little variations on a cast. If, say, you've got your fly in your hand and you've got no space here at all, but you might have got some space above you, sometimes if you can go straight up, let go of your fly goes straight up and straight out again. It's only a short range cast, but it's handy. And a tiny little variation which I sometimes think I use unconsciously is that when you're trying to do a cast and you haven't got any space, you can sort of combine a roll cast with an overhead cast by tapping it in the air and tapping it out in front of you without it going. I caught that branch then just for demonstration purposes. Just do a little tap and you're tapping it forward before the fly has got a chance to go behind you. And it gets you out there without getting that stuff behind you. Passing milkmaids and the like, a constant hazard in Bakewell. Thank you very much for your attention. Tight lines.